Welcome to Climate Brawl 3. I have Gerald Kutney and I have Dale Johnson here. And Gerald, could you just kick it off here and start us off?
Sure. Well, thank you for hosting another Climate Brawl. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy talking about climate denialism all the time. This time I see we're going into the darkest layers of a den of denialism, the home of the stalker trolls, who relentlessly humiliate and harass leading climate scientists and climate activists, often using quote mining and memes. This is a vile campaign of intimidation. And I look forward to hear what Dale and you too, Tom, have to say about this practice.
Oh, sure. My opinion, what I do, I don't have to worry about the science. I don't need to know algorithms. I don't need to know truncating. I don't need to know lowest smoothing. I don't need to know R2. I don't need to know any of that stuff, because all I do is study the scientists that are involved in climate science. That makes me different. I'm not arguing their science. I'm just pointing out what they're saying. Nothing I post is out of context, meaning that not the context isn't posted with it, because you can't post a 58-page paper on Twitter, is I supply it and nothing in the context will show anything different than what the quote is. They don't retract it. They don't walk it back. They don't explain it that they really didn't mean it in anything they do. You were on the show with Tom a few weeks ago, or actually about 4 months ago. And I listened to it. I had to listen to it twice. Like, you did a great job, Gerald. The first one, I was laughing so hard I couldn't take notes. But I listened to it again, and I started taking notes. So if you want to, we can address a few things that you stated, and then we can delve into them a little bit deeper than just the surface. One thing that you stated was, if you remember, the rate of change now is faster than it's ever been in human history. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Science in the 1980s changed their viewpoint on that. That's what they thought too. I don't know, have you heard of Richard Alley?
Yes, I have.
He's a colleague of Michael Mann at Penn State. He came up and they studied ice cores. He did a book on the 2-mile time machine. Jeff Severinghaus was involved. Jonathan Overpeck was involved. Raymond Pierre Humbert was involved. Those names are probably familiar to just about everybody. Let me tell you what they said. In the National Academy's press, large, abrupt climate changes have repeatedly affected much or all of the Earth, reaching as much as 10 degrees Celsius in 10 years. We do not yet understand abrupt climate changes well enough to predict them. The models used to project future climate changes and their impacts are not especially good at simulating the size, speed, extent of past changes, casting uncertainties on the assessment of future changes. Jeff Severinghaus, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, a very well-known name in climate science. He says abrupt warning events, some over less than a decade, occurred some 22 times in the last 100,000 years. He says these are global phenomena. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, I'm sure you've heard of the AAAS. University of Cambridge put in a peer-reviewed paper. 23 of 25 abrupt warming events were synchronous with warming in the tropics and southern hemisphere. University of Copenhagen, again in the American Association of Advancement of Science. Temperatures rose 10 to 15 degrees in less than 10 years. Cause unknown, researchers can't reproduce them in climate models. Stefan Ramstorff, nobody would say that he's a climate denier or a contrarian or a baddie in any sense of the word. He's one of Greta's science advisors. In 2003, he put out an article, more than 20 times in the last 100,000 years, large and abrupt climate shifts have occurred up to 12 degrees centigrade in a decade. These are global phenomena confirmed from over than 170 locations around the world, including New Zealand and Antarctica. Can you dispute those?
I'm not here to dispute science with you, Dale. As you said, you don't know the science. Can you let me speak? I'll let you speak for about 5 straight minutes without interrupting you. Let's go back to what you said at the very beginning. What do? You do quote mining. And that means you go through the literature, you go through people's Twitter accounts, and you go through every single sentence they have ever made, desperately looking for something.
Can we talk about the science, Gerald?
Will you stop interrupting, please? Will you stop?
Can we talk about the science?
Will you stop
That's
interrupting?
why we're here.
You brought it up.
We're here.
You said what you did, and I'm challenging you on that.
If you want me to challenge your background, I will.
Yeah, please.
I can go into your 10-back background. But let's
I'm
talk
going
about
about what you do on Twitter.
We're not here to discuss Twitter. We're here for science. Would you like to talk
the whole time? Go ahead.
I can go for hours.
I noticed that. And I let you talk, and so let me make my point.
I made a point. I made 7 points.
You started off.
Dispute it.
You started off from the very beginning. Your very first comment.
My background.
I will remind you. You said that you take quotes of famous scientists and you do not take them out of context.
That's correct.
That is not correct. You take Jim Henson out of context all the time. You have been told that many times. You have taken myself dozens of times out of context. You don't care about the context. What you do is you take a naked sentence, you post it, and imply that the scientist you're trying to humiliate that person for that one sentence. And what you do lots of times is you'll take 2 sentences, and often they'll be years apart, and say, look at this. This famous person has contradicted themselves. My goodness. And then you'll have your silly little meme where you Photoshop some silly little character of them trying to humiliate them. Why do you do that? I use their words. Out of context. They're not out of context. Of course James Hansen was very, very clear in the 1980s. He was very clear. And then he went on to say in that paper, which many people have told you about, which you just simply ignore or you block them for saying it, that Hansen was announcing how he had found that that global warming was taking place. He said from the 60s to the 80s, he said from the 60s to 80s, that was the response that they thought would replicate global warming according to the theory. But the problem with that is it wasn't warming at that time. It didn't warm from the 60s to the 80s. NOAA, Thomas Carl had a debate in the newspaper with James Hansen in 1989. And Hansen did not dispute that it had cooled from 1921 to 1979. It's indisputable. You can't say it's warming. What do you think happened during global cooling? Global cooling was a fact. No climate scientists said global cooling did not happen. You're just deflecting from what you do. I get how many memes have you done of me? 100, 200? Oh, it's an awful lot of fun. We've probably done probably a few hundred for sure. Okay. I know when I say something what the context is. How many times how many times have you quoted me and I've shown you that, for example, that quote isn't actually mine? What it is that I have been looking at an art. Sure. I've been looking at an art. Can I continue? Sure. Oh, thank you. I'll be quoting, what I'll do is I'll be reading an article. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but often they'll have a little Twitter symbol, the bird. If you click on it, it will do an automatic tweet for you on that article. And so I use that sometimes. I'll click the article because I think some people might want to see it. What I find is that then suddenly one of these I did years ago, you'll put it as a quote, as some nasty comment saying that I made that statement. I did not make that statement. What I did was just tweeted the article. And you know that. But what you do is you never say exactly how that was done. And you know you've done it to begin with, because it'll have the link to the article. It usually will have a picture associated with it. You have done that dozens of times. So how can you say that you don't take it out of context?
I don't take it out of context because I use the words that are posted on your timeline.
You say that time and time again. Those words, let's all agree to begin up front. Those exact words have appeared in one of my tweets. Probably
Exactly.
all of them. I don't know. There may be one. You do so many, I can't keep up with all of them. But that doesn't mean you haven't taken it in context. Context, I've given you one example of a whole pile. Another one, I'll put something in quotation marks. And you say, here is another quote. But what it is, that is a part of a Twitter thread. And the quote comes from the person before who made that statement. And so I have highlighted the statement that they have made because I'm trying to make a point about it. But what do? You put it out as my statement. And again, I
put it out as you're the source of the statement, for sure.
No, you don't. You put it on your timeline. My statement, Dale. You put it out as my statement, and then
I put it out as from your timeline.
And then you stand up here and say that you do not take statements out of context. You do it constantly.
I attach you to what you post on your timeline. Let me give you an example. We can go in here on your timeline, February 26, 2019. I'm not talking about ethical oil, which Alberta has. You probably remember that. April 28th, 2019. I believe that Alberta produces ethical oil and we should use it. October 20th, 2019. Canada make claim to an ethical producer of asbestos, tobacco, and oil. October 24th, 2019. Alberta is proud of its ethical oil, as it should be. January 19th, 21. There's no such thing as ethical oil and gas. There are some places, such as Canada, where it is less evil. January 18th, 22nd. Saudi Arabia is buying shares in oil sands. The ethical oil argument is dead. But on January 27th, 20, you said ethical oil, which you've used many times, is not just an oxymoron. It is a term used by morons. So that's what I do. I put your
no, you don't.
Statements that go all over the map and tie them together so people can see the inconsistencies. They can see the flip-flopping back and forth. You'll take whatever side you want on any issue, and the next day you'll say the exact opposite thing. That's what I do. I point out the hypocrisy. I point out the flip-flops. I point out going all over the map on any subject. And your timeline is
and why do you do that? Why do you do quote mining to harass and intimidate people? What are you trying to accomplish?
Gerald, you know very well that you seek out attention. You go after people with more than a few thousand followers, and you tweet to provoke. So I'm just giving you back what you do. But I'm using your timeline, the words that you post, and attaching you to what you post, making you responsible for what you post on your timeline. If I put hate, even though somebody else put it on a timeline, I retweet it. I become the owner of it because I retweeted. I own my timeline.
Oh, do you?
You don't want to take responsibility for your timeline because you're all over the map, and then you say, I'm taking it out of context. There's nothing. It's on your timeline. You own it. If you don't want to own it, maybe you should quit playing on Twitter and trying to antagonize people.
Yeah, maybe you should, instead of putting out hundreds of dishonest quote mining on lots of people, including myself, claiming that you've now changed your answer completely. First, you said you did not take something out of context. And now you admitted you have taken it out of context. You just admitted that I'm supposed to take ownership when I retweet a article tweet that comes up with an automated quote with it.
I have to take responsibility.
That is not the same thing. That is not my quote. You know it's not my quote because you see the full context, which you never show. You never bother showing a link to anything for people can check it out. So people have to check it out themselves.
Perfect. I love people doing their own research. That's what I do.
I have over 175,000 tweets. Okay, yes, I tweet too much. I have to agree with that. If you cannot, when you look through that, searching for a contradictory few statements, I am sure you're always going to find it. Sometimes I have made a mistake. A few times I may have changed my mind. the vast majority of what you tweet, you have blatantly taken out of context.
The
Just
context
like
isn't
quote mining
different.
is dishonest. No one should be quote mining. You search the literature just to humiliate people. And you think somehow that's correct.
Why do you quote mine Prince Charles? Why do you quote mine Michael Mann? Why do you quote mine Catherine Hale? You do it. I can't. There's
Quote
again
mining
your
is a dishonest
hypocrisy.
technique.
Your
It is not.
hypocrisy is on display
And
for
what you
everybody
do
to
is you
see,
go
Gerald.
through someone's history, scrounging to find out that they have done something wrong. I will requote Dr. Mann that has quoted something recently because I am proud of what he states and I want to reinforce it. Prince Charles will say, or King Charles will say something that I want the world to see as well. I do not go through someone's timeline looking through hundreds or thousands of tweets spread over years, trying to find gotcha moments to humiliate them. That is called harassment, Dale. You're intimidating
Gerald,
people.
have you not challenged people to go through your timeline? When you say, when did I lie? Go through Twitter advanced search. You challenge people. I took up the challenge. I can show you where you've contradicted yourself. Just with the oxymoron moron. You tried to make a fool of people that believe in using oil, fossil fuels. You tried to make us look like morons because we use the term ethical moron. But you're the one that came up with it, not us. I've never used ethical oil in my arguments. I don't care where it comes from. I'll use it. You're the one that came up with you call them snarl words. So you can use a word, you call it science. And if we ask you about it, then you'll say we're bringing it up. It's a snarl world, just like what you did with Tom the other day.
Dale, what most people do when they're on Twitter and they have a disagreement, I will tweet something and let's say you don't like it. You will come back and you may have a reference. You usually won't. And you'll say, well, you're wrong because blah, blah. And we can go at it. I don't know of anyone that you're actually very good at it, to go through my 175,000 tweets looking for two or three that may appear to contradict one another, or you take it out of context, completely and just to humiliate me. Pardon me?
Just probably 1,000 times you've contradicted yourself.
Oh, okay. Only 1,000. It's okay. But I just don't understand it. I don't know how a decent person does that. What you're doing is you're stalking me. You're stalking Dr. Mann. You're stalking Dr. Hansen. You're stalking Dr. Hayhoe, where you say, look at this. Dr. So-and-so has made this statement. And then you'll have your Photoshop meme trying to make them look like they've done something wrong when they have not.
Sometimes
they have not. I have never seen anything that you have ever posted with all your silly memes where someone has truly done something wrong, except for the person issuing those memes. It's wrong to do that.
Okay, so
I don't
maybe
think they've done anything wrong.
Excuse me, since we have limited time here, maybe we should talk about specific statements rather than general quote mining, etc. Maybe talk about very specific statements and what both of you believe about those statements.
Well, the one thing I've told Don TJ90 dozens upon dozens of times the example I've gave. Well, let's just stick with a simple one. Okay, I don't have all my great posts that you have done to show that I've done something evil. But what I have done is that I have shown you many times this issue of retweeting a article. Then you say, well, you have never taken a statement of mine out of context. Let's just stick for that for a minute. So and when you see that quote, you know I've taken it from the article. Because if you have any doubt, if you click on the link and then you yourself tweet it, you'll get exactly the same statement that I got. So how is that not taking it out of context when you
said I could just get the exact same statement as you have? How can that be out of context, Gerald? You're not making any sense.
Dale, you and I live in a different universe, because what happens is you're taking it out of context because it's not my statement. It's a statement that comes out of the article, how the article's been set up, that they're promoting the article on. you come back and you will specifically imply or specifically state that I stated the article. So how can that be right?
The quote comes from the article. You post the quote. I attach it to your timeline just like you do. Only I put your face to it. That's all.
That's all. Okay.
Yep.
We're going in circles here. I think what you're doing is totally wrong. Somehow you've convinced yourself this totally right. It's not. And there's no point taking all the hundreds of memes that you state that are out of context in other ways. And many have contradicted what your statements are to show that they are taken out of context. I also know in my own personal case, which I know very well, a lot of them are taken out of context because I have been quoting the person before me in the thread. It's in the thread that I'm attacking the person, which you never make any statement about. What you again say, and you could use the same argument, yes, it appeared in my tweet, but it's not my quote. It's the quote of the person I'm trying to make a point with in the thread, which you conveniently leave out when you say, well, I don't take anything in context. You quoted in your tweet. Just because I put it in a tweet, it does not make it my statement.
Okay, let's take an example. You posted on your timeline, Israel was stealing clouds and causing climate change. Do you remember that, Gerald?
I do. That's when I double check.
That's why I make a meme. I'm attaching you to those anti-Semitic propaganda.
Oh, now you're accusing me of being anti-Semitic. That's very kind of you, Dale. I appreciate that.
Blaming Israel? Do you think that's
where did that statement come from?
Comes from your timeline. I wouldn't have known it if I didn't see your timeline.
Okay. You have conveniently forgotten that statement
I didn't forget.
Was an article that I think it might have been out in Newsweek. And so all I did was use the tweet from Newsweek. I think it's Newsweek. I clicked it, and that's what they came up with. And so I never generated those words. All I did was shared the statement that came out of Newsweek, which you conveniently left the link out of when you quote. And you did exactly what you just stated right now. You put that onus on me.
Yeah,
the onus is on you.
Anti-Semitic propaganda.
Pardon?
You promoted anti-Semitic propaganda by blaming Israel. Whether you want to say an Iranian general, then you're working with him. It doesn't matter. But it's still anti-Semitic climate propaganda. Israel isn't stealing clouds. Did you clarify that you did not attach yourself to that? That you reject that? No, you just left it there sitting in the open for anybody to think Israel's, somebody that doesn't know any better is going to say Israel's stealing clouds. They're causing climate change. It's not true. You didn't disassociate yourself from the anti-Semitic propaganda that you put on your timeline. That's what I do. I point out the hypocrisy. And if you don't like it, then maybe stop doing it. Detach yourself from it and say, I don't believe this. This is for educational purposes only. But you don't. You attach it to your timeline. You take responsibility for it. Now you're running away from it. I can't help that. Now, you said in that thing that with Tom, you said that science doesn't use global average temperature, right? They use anomalies. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. James Hansen, in his testimony to Congress in 1986, 1951 to 1980, global mean temperature of 15 degrees Celsius is a base to determine temperature. So he's saying it, not me. NOAA, Howard Diamond, July 22nd. He's from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. He's the Climate Science Program Manager. He's the U.S. Climate Program Manager for USCRN. He's the U.S. National Coordinator for Global Climate Observation Systems, GCOS. Do you know what he said, Gerald? Global mean temperature is calculated from global temperature data. And from that global mean temperature, anomalies are generated. When you step on a scale, do you get an anomaly or do you get a measurement? When you take a temperature reading of somebody that has a fever, do you get an anomaly or do you get a measurement? You don't know the anomaly until you know the measurement. And that's what Howard Diamond said. So do you know more than Noah? Probably not.
How does the variation in temperature that's reported come from?
From the global mean temperature every year.
Not.
1997, it was 16.92. 1998, it was 14.4. In the 2010s, according to the New York Times, the average for the 2010s was 14.7. 2015, according to NOAA, was 14.79. In 2019, according to AP News, it was 14.85. In 2020, according to World Meteorological Association, it was 14.9. In 2021, NOAA said it was 14.92. In 2022, it was 14.88. And from those temperatures, then they derive an anomaly. But they have to have a base first. You don't step on a scale and going, I'm 0.3 over average.
Well, Dale, I'm very glad at the very beginning you said you know nothing about the science because you're making that clear right now. The temperature is taken by variation at individual temperature stations, not from a calculation of a global average. And by the numbers you gave out, some of them were spread out like they're 30, 40 years ago. The way the global climate temperature variance is determined today is not from an average temperature for the Earth. If you think, so by your definition you just gave, no one shouldn't believe that there's global warming. If you look at the warming graphs that are produced out by NOAA, do you see them to use the average temperature over 100 years or 50 years?
No, but what I can do, Gerald, what I can do is take the statement from NOAA in 1989 that says that the Earth cooled, the global climate cooled from 1921 to 1979. You take a look at that same time frame today, and they flipped it upside down. Now it's warming. Somebody's fudged the data.
The area, now you're including NOAA has fudged the data.
I can prove it.
Oh, you can prove it. I bet you can prove it just as good as Tony Heller can prove it.
No, I can prove it better because I've emailed them. Do you know Carl 2015, the pause buster? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Said the hiatus didn't happen. Thomas Carl, 2015. What he'd adjusted the Argo buoys because they were coming in, they thought was too cold. They had a cold bias. Even though they were electronic, even though they were the highest tech available, they were comparing it to the ship buoys or the ship sea surface temperatures. And they said, well, these new high-tech ones can't be right. These electronic measurements can't be right. We're going to fudge them. And what they did is the equivalent to the brittle barge. They just lit a match under it to bring them up to what they thought it should be. So in other words, the model was right, but the data was wrong. So that's what Carl did in 2015. I emailed them and asked them, it didn't make sense to take the high-tech temperature readings and adjust the high-tech temperature readings. They're electronic. They don't have a bias. And I asked them, how did you come up with that? Why wouldn't you adjust the SSTs from the ships? Instead, they said, well, we discussed that in a meeting. I've got the emails. They said, we discussed that in a meeting. We decided to go this way. And he says, I didn't do the calculations, but here's a guy that did. And he works for NOAA. So I emailed him and I says, how did you come across this? Because I said, it just doesn't make sense. And he goes, well, you're right. He says, but he said that the differential doesn't change no matter what. He says, differential is going to stay. I say, no, it isn't. And I can show you how it isn't here, Gerald. Take a look.
Dale, I'm getting very bored with this. I saw the same story when you were on Tom. I don't want to see your silly little diagram.
Here's the temperature going up until the pause hits, 1998. And then it kind of flattened out, right? If you adjust these warmer because of a cold bias, there's no pause. It's gone.
Oh,
that's why it was called the pause buster. But if you go the other way, and these are too warm, guess what happens, Gerald?
Yeah, let me ask you another question.
than before.
Do you think the temperature rises steadily with global warming, or does it have ups and downs and has some chaotic aspects to it?
Hey, Gerald, I just showed you how NOAA fudged it. They said
Well,
it doesn't make a difference
that's very
with the
impressive.
differential.
You have no idea how impressed I am with that. You should actually send that to NOAA and tell them that they're corrupt.
And he thanked me.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
He was a PhD. He didn't know how to read a clock.
Oh, okay.
And
Just to clarify at the very beginning, because I think you fairly answered this. What is your university background in?
I don't worry about credentials. Do you know any of the climate scientists that I've emailed? NCAR, UCAR. I've emailed the people at University of East Anglia climate research. I've emailed meteorologists in the East Coast. I've emailed them all over the world. Scripps in California. I've emailed all of them. No one of them has come back. What are your credentials? None of them. They don't care. They will answer the question. I had a 20-page back and forth with an he's not a meteorologist, but he's an astrophysicist. And we went back and forth for 20 emails. Very pleasant, very polite. And so, but they never ask, what are my credentials? But there was one case where there was recently, there was a lot in the news about the polar vortex coming down, causing the extreme cold weather down in Texas, Florida. It's been going on forever. There was one guy, Judah Cohen. He's a seasonal forecaster out of the East Coast. I think he works for AER. He put out in the news about that the polar vortex was caused by global warming. There was another guy from Europe that said exactly the same thing. So I emailed both of them. This is telling you the difference between a scientist and a pseudoscientist. I emailed both of them and I said, how can it be global warming if the first written documentation of the circumpolar vortex was in the 1800s, 1859 to be exact? I said, how can you attribute it to global warming? And I said, when the cooling period is on from 1921 to 1979, there was a lot of polar vortexes in that. The coldest temperatures were back in the 1899 in Texas and Florida. So, but this is the response I got from them. Both of them thanked me for the information. One of them, Judah Cohen, he said, I'm only looking at since 1979 when it's been warming. That's how I attribute it to global warming. That doesn't make sense to me. What the other PhD said, he said, I didn't have that understanding of the history. And he says, maybe we should take care of attributing something that happened in cooling and warming just to a natural event. It doesn't make sense to attach something when we're in a slight warming cycle, to attach it to global warming when it was attached to global cooling 30 years before that. It doesn't make sense, but that's the difference. One guy thanked me and he says, by the way, at the end, he says, what university do you work at? He's the only one that asked for my credentials after he thanked me, and he said he was going to include my comments with his paper.
Well, I often ask the credentials of climate deniers, and it's quite common that usually they have none. And especially the ones that call the leading scientific organizations literally in the world corrupt. I think it's an insult to everyone that you, with your tales, have found beyond a doubt that these organizations are corrupt. I think that is some of the most foolish statements I have ever heard.
Okay, let me prove it, Gerald. Let me prove it. You were probably around the same time. It may have preceded my time because I don't remember a lot about it when I was growing up. But in the 60s and 70s, there was a science endeavor, US versus Russia, in polywater. Hundreds of peer-reviewed papers over about 7 years, elaborate diagrams, elaborate wording, published in peer-reviewed papers. People doing the same thing over and over and over again. Polywater, polywater, polywater. It was a race. The US wanted to catch up to Russia because they thought Russia had an advantage. After about 7 years, there was one guy that when he came, one of the scientists that was promoting polywater, he came out of an exercise area and his shirt was drenched in sweat. So he did, out of curiosity, he wrung it out, put it on a slide, put it on the microscope, and he goes, holy shit, that's polywater. It's contaminated water with sweat. Scientists played with that game for 7 years because of funding. Nobody lost their job. Nobody got scolded. Nobody got their grants back, but it was a game science played for 7 years until one guy said it was a mistake. It was contaminated water by sweat. I got exactly the same thing from my own sweat that we've been challenging for 7 years. All of a sudden, the funding dried up. Nobody lost their job. No, the papers are still in published, peer-reviewed, published journals right now.
Dale,
nobody took them away.
Dale,
that shows you how
most...
easy it is to go along with whatever game is being played at the time.
That's the most silly deflection I've ever heard in my life. You're rambling on about it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And
sure
what happens in a situation like that, I'm very associated with what you had. Science corrects itself. And so you are talking about that there was some excitement for a few years. Some of the articles did appear in the peer-reviewed literature, and science corrected itself. Modern science of climate change, the modern science of climate change started in the 1950s. We are now 70 years later. There has been no evidence, absolutely none, that challenges the theory of modern climate change, that it's man-made, mainly caused by us, and it's real, and we need to replace fossil fuels as soon as possible. There is none. And that's the way science works. What science works is that the theories of science are accepted until new evidence comes about that shows that if it's wrong, if ever. It does not depend on someone calling up somebody that worked at NOAA and having a conversation. It never has, it never will. I'm sure you have fun talking with real scientists and it makes you feel important, but I can assure you it does not.
I just use it for learning. I want to learn.
No, you use it to insult people. You use it to insult
these
NOAA.
People.
You insult NOAA. You call them the corrupt. It's just like your memes. Everything you do is to harass and humiliate the people associated with the science of climate change. You do it with Greta Thunberg. You do it with activists. You do it with the leading climate scientists, that somehow you are better than them. And here is why. None of it makes sense whatsoever. In fact, it's a cruel thing to do. It's a cruel thing to do. And I really don't understand why
you said it's a cruel thing to do. You said it's a cruel thing to do. Hang on a second. Who said climate deniers deserve a special place in hell?
Oh, I did. That
Who was that?
A fun one. They say you deserve a special place.
Do you think that's cruel?
Now?
Do you think that's cruel, or not? See, I have fun. I don't think it's cruel. I have fun. You do it to demean people. I do it to show what they've said. That's it. I attach them to their words.
Climate denialism.
Nobody denies the climate.
It's one of the most nefarious movements in the history of the world. Because what it's trying to do is to stop action, to stop the climate crisis. And by doing that, literally people are dying and there's destruction because of extreme weather events across the world, and it's going to get worse. Science first raised very serious objections to stopping climate change back in the 70s. And the
actually went before that.
Even before that.
Way
and
before
nothing
that.
has changed. Since that time, every single report that's come out has reaffirmed that climate change is dangerous. It's a serious threat. And there you are.
It's money.
It's what?
It's money.
What's money?
The crisis. Most of those climate scientists have books. They get publicity.
Thank you, Dale. You've done what every climate denier does, is every climate scientist in the world is corrupt.
I never said that, Gerald. That's out of context.
Out of context?
I never said that. I never said that.
We're talking about generally the science and how the science has only got stronger for decades. And then you said it's because you specifically stated it was because of money. And I said, what does that mean? It's because, well, the scientists are dependent on money to do the research. And
I'll
then I
give you an
said,
example, Gerald. I'll prove my point.
I don't want your
I'll
example.
prove my
You're going
point.
to prove squat. You've never proven anything. Okay, you go
All right.
around with your ramblings and your accusations, and you're just insulting people. I don't know how you can do it. You don't do it once a week, or you do it several times a day. And you and your little friends there play with your little memes and do your insulting little pictures and Photoshop. You dox people as well.
No, never dox anybody.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's fair to show a picture of someone's house and then mention their family member's name? Is that doxing?
Absolutely not. If somebody puts it on the internet, it's not doxing.
So if you scour the internet, which you must have done to get the names of my family, it's okay for you to post it and then post a picture of the front of my house with their names. That's okay.
It's all public information, Gerald. Try Google Streets. Your house is there.
You think that is the ethical thing to do?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And why would you post that?
Because
why
it's
would you
public
post
information?
No. Why would you go to the trouble of posting the front of my house and the names of my family? Why
People are
would you
interested where you live. People are interested whether you've changed your lifestyle. Absolutely.
No, Dale, that's called intimidation. And what you're trying to do, let's put it this way. I don't think decent people do that.
I don't think decent people tell people they should have a special place in hell, Gerald.
I referred that to
so
climate
I'm just
denialism
giving you back a little bit of what you
did. And you're the one that replayed that. It must have been 100 times. So if it upset you so much, go ahead. I don't mind. I think climate denialism is a horrible thing for people to do.
Thank you for the permission, Gerald, to keep doing what I'm doing.
Okay. But because I think climate denialism is a horrible movement. I think it's a horrible thing that people that do it, not the average person does not believe in climate change. They have been duped by the propaganda that's been out by the oil industry and by hardcore climate deniers for decades. If I
say Alberta produces ethical oil, we should use it, am I promoting?
You can say anything you want, Dale. I'm talking generally. You can go back to specifics all you want.
I'm asking about your statements.
I'm saying in that case, those statements I did make. And in hindsight, they were a mistake. When I first said that, and I do not hold that position now. And that's what people have a right to do. And actually, that's what science does as well. They may say something in the past, and it's one of the few times actually that it wasn't a distortion that you showed. But what you do is still dishonest quote mining. You scrounge through someone's tweet threads just looking for garbage about them.
Well, the reason I started that, I'll tell you, Gerald. Paul Williams, UK modeler, came on the line, and he somehow got into this thread, and he started throwing around climate denier. So I go, who the hell is this guy? I had no idea. I'd never heard of him before. Paul D. Williams from the UK, University of Reading. I go, I'm going to find out. So I took Google Scholar and read some of his papers. In 2005, he was talking about how bad the climate models are. He said it was so disheartening how many processes aren't included in the models. He also said, we can't wait until the models are right. We've only got 20 years. So by 2025, it's going to be too late. I put that on there. He started attacking me. All I did was show what he said. That's it. Because he started throwing around climate denier. I found out who he was. I found out his deadline. James Hansen had a deadline in 2009. We only have 4 more years with 2013. And 2006, he said, we only have 10 more years, 2016. You don't see the conflict? You don't see the game that they're playing? You posted 2016 and promoted that.
The so-called game that you talk about, and I've seen you show these over and over again. You show them for a lot of famous scientists that they say there's X number of years left. What these scientists are doing is they're not predicting the end of the world. They have been frustrated that after warnings for decades that this was coming, and it was coming quickly, that if we don't start to react, it's going to get really bad. And what has happened is that today we're still arguing this 60, 70 years after the fact. And the problem is if the world reacted today, today that we seriously looked at climate change, and by some date we were going to stop GHG emissions, we're not ending the climate crisis. When we stop doing that, we're making it worse. We stop making it worse. It's going to take decades, centuries more to clean it up afterwards. So these scientists that you demean on a continuous basis are literally pleading with the world to wake up to the seriousness of the matter instead of listening to the garbage that climate deniers turn out on a regular basis.
Yeah, one of the very first ones was Paul Ehrlich saying we have
stop giving that quote of his in German that's so abused that every Mickey Mouse climate denier would.
In 20 years, people are going to melt or disappear in a cloud of blue steam.
Dale,
he was probably the first
that
climate alarmist.
Silly quote. It must be 10 times a day that every Mickey Mouse climate denier in the world shows. Please don't.
It just
bore
shows
me
the
with
crisis
that
is valuable for PR.
Oh,
he won the Tyler Award for doing it. Doesn't that show you it's a joke?
No, Dale. What's joke is your dishonest quote mining.
I don't think they're dishonest. I think they attach the people to what they say, attach the people the propaganda they post on their timeline. And if they don't want to take responsibility for it, maybe they should delete it from their timeline.
All you are is a harasser. You harass people. You do it constantly. I'm glad you're proud of it. Good for you. But you're living in la la land if you do not know what you're doing. All you're doing
I know
is
exactly
you look for garbage for people anywhere you can find it, and you will distort that information any way you can. You'll take words out of context. You'll take words that the people didn't say, and then you'll take several statements that seem to contradict each other when they don't. Or if it's the case that one statement's like 30 years old or 40 years old, Stephen Snyder is a famous victim of yours that you abused to death. And one paper he stated that later on he corrected that you punish people for making mistakes or what you interpret for making mistakes.
He never made a mistake. He never made a mistake. But talking about Stephen Snyder, when the Douglas paper came out, the alarmist climate scientists went livid. So what they did, and Ben Santer was involved in this, they came out and the journal gave Ben Santer a heads up. He said, Douglas's paper coming out. He says, you guys got to get your act together, get something out that we can put in at the same time. Usually it takes a couple of years for a paper to get in there through all the pre-publication stages, through peer review and get published. What this journal did, I can go through my infographics to tell you who did it. What he did, he's in my infographics, memes, you call them meme, but they're information.
Info trash is not infographics, Dale. Come on, wake up.
Okay, let me finish the story, Gerald. He said, I'm going to hold this paper as long as I can. You guys do what you can to dispute it. And they had to get Stephen Snyder involved to get a quick turnaround on the peer-reviewed papers. So when the Douglas paper came out, they had something to contradict it right away. They bastardized the entire process. Why? Because they were upset. One climate scientist put out a paper.
You started your conversation by using the term science with climate alarmist scientist. What is that?
The ones that I quote, like Stefan Ramstorff, he has told me my quotes of him are accurate.
No,
he's
you
never
used
said
the
they're
term
out of
climate alarmist scientist. What actually does that mean? What sort of scientists are climate alarmists?
The ones that talk about the crisis, the ones that talk about catastrophic, the ones that talk about existential threats, those are the alarmists. Those are words
the one thing
use.
that the scientists do is part of their mantra. When the evidence suggests that in the future there is the potential for serious death and destruction. The job of science is to warn people before it happens, or they can take action to try to prevent it. If you call that alarmist, well, you don't know what science is. It is.
They can suggest.
How can you think of a more noble thing for scientists to do to saying all the evidence suggests that climate change is going to be serious and people are going to die from it? It's going to cause destruction. The biosphere is going to be hurt by it. You have to take action. That, sir, is not alarmist. That is what scientists are supposed to do. It's what any decent person would do.
They promote their work by using words that aren't even in their paper. Crisis. You won't find climate crisis in very many peer-reviewed papers. You won't find catastrophic climate change in very many peer-reviewed papers. You won't find, I don't think you'll find existential threat in any peer-reviewed papers, but it shows on the headlines, and that's what they're trying to brainwash the public that won't read past the headlines. I read
You're
past
right
the headlines.
those. You're absolutely right what you're saying there. But what happens there is that in scientific terms, they just state the facts. They don't try to dream up names for it. The press itself comes up with a lot of these names, but you have to look, what are these papers saying? What are these scientists saying in these papers that may not say crisis? They may not say existential. What they're saying is there is a very serious risk that death and destruction is going to take place by climate change. So of course the press picks up as a crisis, but of course the nations around the world pick it up as a climate emergency. And if that is what their proper thing to do. This is a climate crisis. That this specific word does not show up in these scientific papers. The details of the papers show what it is. If you look at the SR15 paper by the IPCC, it shows.
Was that the red alert paper? We're in the red alert stage.
That's where they compare the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase versus the 2 degrees Celsius increase. If you go to the NASA climate page and you look at effects of climate change, they just list one after the other. Any person who read that would say, holy crap, that's an emergency. It's a crisis. But for some reason, climate deniers go out, they insult the scientists for saying, well, they never said in their papers, so it's not a crisis or emergency.
Do you know how the 1.5 and the 2 degree limit came to be?
Yeah,
Have you studied that, Gerald?
Yeah. And what it is, it's a little bit of an arbitrary number. But what did they do in that study?
It's not a little bit of an arbitrary number.
Let me finish. They state that between 1.5 and 2 degrees, they compare of how the risks are of serious events that would be extremely destructive would be between the two. That's the only important thing that there is.
Do you think that's scientific?
The difference between the 1.5 and the 2 is the purpose of it is what we're approaching 1.5 very rapidly. The odds of that stopping it now is almost nil. And so now we have the 2 degree target. And if you look at the Paris Agreement, which is signed by, I think, 195 countries in the world, the world nations have agreed to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius and to try to keep it between 1.5. And so you can say, well, those numbers don't matter. The world disagrees with you, Dale. And I know that you think you know more than every climate scientist, and you know more than the world does. Okay.
I know the climate scientists, but how the 1.5 to 2 degrees came up, I'll tell you. You're familiar with Phil Jones. He says the 2 degree limit. He says it was never defined what it means. When was the base against which 2 degrees Celsius was calculated from? I know you don't know the answer, but neither do I. I think it was plucked out of thin air. Hans Joachim Schulnhuber. 2 degrees Celsius is not a magical limit. It's a political goal. UK Department of Environment, Nigel Arnold. What is considered dangerous anthropogenic interference with global climate will ultimately be a political decision. Catherine Hayhoe, in a Forbes article, she said in Cancun 2010 is when they came up with this limit. All the governments in the world, not scientists, all the governments in the world got together and some of them said, we're already at 1 degree and it's dangerous for us. And then some of them said, well, we've crunched the numbers. We think 3 degrees will be okay for us, but beyond that is dangerous. So everybody had to negotiate, and it's politics. All these politicians had to negotiate to figure out, well, what do we agreed on? And they finally agreed on 2 degrees or 1.5 if we can. Plucked out of thin air. It's not science.
Dale,
that's what I'm pointing.
Is that they pick targets for people to achieve. And the point is that I never heard any scientists say that 3 degrees Celsius would be okay in temperature rise. If you have, so I don't know where you got that number from, but it's not real. And the point is the idea of setting targets. One of the reasons that they went with temperature instead of some other areas was to allow the U.S. to sign the agreement, because the U.S. Senate had set it up that if the U.S. would not accept GHG reduction targets without all other countries having GHG reduction targets as well. At Copenhagen, Barack Obama went in there and set up the deal for the temperature guidelines, because as President of the United States, he could sign the U.S. to agree with that. And so the idea of having targets, however they came about, the point is they're a guideline of what the world has to try to do before it gets really bad. And you can say, well, what happens at 2.5 degrees? Should we stop? It's past 2. You can't win this game. You're always losing. So if you reach 1.5, you just lost. And if you still haven't done anything, it'll hit 2 and you've lost again. It hits 2.5 and it's lost again. And every time that happens, it's an escalation of the death and destruction caused by climate change. That's what science teaches. You can nitpick to your heart's content. And if you think you are demeaning the science of climate change or scientists, but it's foolishness that you keep on quoting these people that say, oh, look what this guy said. Look what this guy said. Nobody cares. Science clearly lays out what the issue is, and no one in the world has shown it to be wrong. If you have proof,
you're not looking for that, Gerald.
If you have proof, I can tell you this. If Dale had proof that climate change,
I want to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Me and my memes.
If you were right, the world would be a happy place for it. Climate scientists don't want to see the world deteriorating the way it is. And they are trying harder and harder. And some of them are more emotional about it than others. And I give them credit, because scientists have a tendency to be very subdued in the way they communicate. That's the way they do in their scientific papers. But more and more are giving out emotional messages because the world is sitting doing squat. And people like you are contributing to it. And I think that's shameful.
Well, Gerald, are you still using natural gas? Are you contributing to the climate crisis, the existential threat?
There you go. There you go. Everyone goes off. Okay. The point is, climate denialism is a horrible thing that people do. And I'm talking about hardcore.
Gerald, your timeline says my words are meaningless. It's my actions. Look after your own house before you do others. And that you're ignoring that. You're disassociating yourself from your own words.
All you're doing is deflecting what the situation is. What we're talking about is how dangerous climate denialism is. We're talking about hardcore climate deniers. There's lots of climate deniers out there, and these are good people, but they have been duped by people like you, duped by people like Tony.
Why do they get duped?
Because of the propaganda campaigns and the misinformation that appears in timelines like yours.
The misinformation like Israel's
like quote mining, clouds? Like dishonest quote mining, like you just calling Noah corrupt, like you just calling most.
Carl, 2015, they made the adjustments to the high-tech buoys. Do you know what? 2 years later, they reversed the adjustments in Huang 2017.
I really don't care.
They can do whatever they
Anything
want.
you have to say, Dale, you have no credentials. In my
I don't
view,
need them.
I'm glad you think that. Your
Do you have
credibility
credentials?
speaks.
Thanks,
Your
Gerald.
credibility speaks for itself. The
you
way you
have
do your
climate-
quote
you
mining,
have
you
credentials?
harass and intimidate some of the most famous climate scientists in the world. And if
Do
you
you
think
have
that's
climate
right,
science credentials? Do
no,
you have
I don't.
climate science credentials?
And to
What?
accept,
Do you
no,
have
I don't.
climate science
I have always stated that I do not have credentials in the climate sciences. But to accept science, you don't have to have any credentials whatsoever. But to refute it, yeah, you better have some very good credentials to refute the climate scientists because it's rock solid. And you
I'm not refuting
giving
it.
these anecdotal stories of yours and your coal mining, and you think somehow this overturns the most scrutinized science in history,
It's not the most
which has
scrutinized
withstood
science,
every
Gerald.
single attack.
It's
And there is no evidence for you fooling yourself.
It's not. There was a peer-reviewed paper that got published, one of them, and it was from a climate realist.
Sorry, who?
A climate realist, somebody that believes it's natural. So this paper got published. Tom
Why is that a
Wigley
climate
wrote.
realist? Why is that a climate realist?
Stop deflecting. Tom Wigley wrote.
You brought
Michael
out the
Mann.
term.
Tom Wigley wrote Michael Mann. He says, I think I know who it is, it's Sayers. If we can find evidence that he's a climate denier, let's prove it and go to AGU and get him ousted. That's how you keep the consensus in line.
There you go.
That's how you keep it in line.
You're taking statements from over 13 years
It doesn't
ago.
matter. It's still
of course
going
it
on.
matters. You're taking it from an illegal email hack. And then now you're making all sorts of grandiose conclusions like you always do. I can tell you not one single statement from any single scientist has ever overturned the overall science. How many climate scientists are there? I actually don't know. There's probably thousands. In the AR6 that recently came out from the IPCC,
Just wait.
they
the
reviewed
AR6
over 36,000 papers,
AR6,
peer-reviewed papers.
Have you not called the AR6 the sacred text of the IPCC?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Yeah, you have.
You probably know
have.
better
It's a
than I do.
religion. It's a religion. It's your Bible. It's your Latin Vulgate. It's your Book of Mormon. It's whatever it is. You call it sacred text. You even put out do you remember the sacred handshake?
No.
Don't forget the sacred handshake.
Okay, I
You're
remember that.
making it-
That
making
was
it
in
easy.
Jessica. Again, you're talking about the IPCC reports are the most scrutinized science that has ever taken place. It has been reviewed by so many people.
No,
And
it isn't, Gerald.
Dale, you don't have a clue
There
what
was
you're
a-
talking about. You're
I do. I'll
talking
tell you.
about
I'll
it's written
explain it,
by
Gerald.
a
Let me
couple
explain
hundred of the most leading climate scientists.
There was a chapter reviewer for the IPCC. He was reviewing a chapter on paleoclimatology. There was a graph that was in the chapter he was reviewing. So he asked Susan Solomon, he says, can I have the PDF of that paper? She goes, if you ask for that again, you're going to lose your position as a reviewer.
Here you go with your anecdotal
That's the
tales again
threats.
that you're so proud of collecting that you think are so important. You know
They
what,
are.
Dale? They're
You're
useless.
the mindset.
All they do is reflect on you and how desperate you are that you're trying to insult the climate scientists. You're just looking for
Some of them
trash
should be.
out there.
Michael Mann went behind people's backs and he tried to organize boycotts. We're not going to
Michael Mann
cite
is
them
one of the
anymore.
most respected climate scientists in the world. He's a Tyler
Yes,
Prize winner.
and
He's
that's
a member
shocking.
of the National
It's
Academy of
shocking.
Scientists, which is the most prestigious scientific organization in the world. And believe me, Dale, you have no worries about ever joining that group.
Do you know that Michael Mann got into a fight with every single of his co-authors? He got into a fight
I don't
with...
care about your little tales.
I do.
Dale.
He got into a fight
Yeah,
with
nobody
Phil
else
Jones. He got
does.
into a fight with Tim
Why don't you
Osborne. He
just
got into a
tell
fight
go
with
call
Pete
Tony
Griffith.
Heller. I'm
He got
sure
into
he
a
would
fight with
enjoy it
Tim
very
Crowley.
much.
He got into a fight with Ed Cook, who is Dr. Dendro. He got into a fight with Zorita, he got into a fight with Hans von Storch. Nobody picked a fight with him. He picked a fight with everybody. There isn't one person that I know of that he didn't pick a fight with.
Why should I care? Why should anyone care?
It shows you the mentality.
Why should anyone care about your anecdotal tales that you think Dr. Mann did?
I think,
of course, you show them in your dishonest tweet with your dishonest quote mining all the time.
With Eduardo Zorita, he was so upset with it. There was a symposium coming up on, and Eduardo Zorita is probably one of the premier paleoclimatologists in the world, very well respected around the world. Michael Mann said, if he's coming to that symposium, I ain't coming. So you decide whether I'm coming or he's coming. That's a prima donna. That guy should be out. He's not a scientist. He's a bully.
Dale, guess what? No one in the world cares what you consider to be a scientist, because you don't have a clue what a scientist is. You have no idea what it takes. You have no idea what it takes to get a peer-reviewed paper published. You do not know what it takes when you're harassed constantly for your scientific work. You have no idea what it is when the far-right Republicans are literally accusing you in the Senate or in the House of committing crimes for the scientific research you did where you're trying to protect the world. These are people,
crimes, Gerald.
The scientists for the IPCC have volunteered to get their services. They don't get paid extra for doing the IPCC reports. And the latest one, I forget the number, there's over 200 of the world's leading climate scientists that volunteered their time with the AR6. That report is screened to death. The point is, if anyone, whether it's you or it's anyone else, has any proof that the climate science is wrong, then put it out there and get people to agree to it, and you will win. If you can't, nobody cares about the cheap shots, the cherry picking, the stalking that you do of these people constantly looking for trash by scrolling. You look for any piece of garbage about anyone everywhere, and you publicize it to the world.
Opposition research, Gerald.
You should be ashamed of doing that.
That you've challenged people to do on your timeline.
That is not, Dale, you have no clue what research is. You think doing a Google search or looking through garbage or looking through my thread to try to find all the stupid things I have said in my Twitter feed, and I'm sure you found some real ones as well. I'm sure we all have. Okay, that's not what a decent person does.
I think what it does is tries to make somebody who's completely has no self-awareness, maybe a little bit more aware what you're posting. Maybe you should take some responsibility for it.
No,
just like when Don was looking at your timeline, and I said, look up, see if Gerald names Greta as a hero in his timeline. She couldn't find it. She couldn't find it. She couldn't find it. She's pretty damn good at what she does. But anyways, she goes the list, and Greta's number 1. Catherine Hale was number 2. Michael Mann was number 3. And then Dr. Vox was number 3. And she goes, who's Dr. Vox? I go, what? Dr. Vox? Never heard of him. She goes, okay. I said, look it up. Check his timeline. The first thing she came across is the doctor is in. I prescribe pee-pee poo-poo. That was your number 4.
Oh, Dale, you're
climate scientist hero,
what do you think that was? How do you think that got in there? It's because it's a mistake.
You didn't check your source.
It's to referral to Roberts, who is a well-known writer for Vox. And what happened was I made a mistake. If you want to think, you want to crucify me please go ahead, because that is true. And I made a mistake. And you milk that.
People are retweeting that as he's an expert. People are retweeting that he's an expert. It's still up online. You still have it there yesterday.
Dale, that you've never made any mistakes in your life, that you are Mr. Perfect with everything you say. And if you want to crucify me for that, please go ahead, because I admit that was a mistake. I did tweet it.
You don't research. You don't check. I do. That's
Dale,
how I came up with. That's how I came up with your number 4.
Need you to do is tell me what I do or don't do. Okay, and frankly, it doesn't matter to me. Okay, because you all I see is you attacking people. You do it in a cruel and nasty manner. You even go to
I
the
would call it
trouble
a
of
humorist.
Photoshop humorist. There is nothing funny about the garbage you share. You sit there and you distort people's faces. You put them in costumes. You with your dishonest memes, and you do it over and over and over again. Just let me ask you this. I was quite curious how, I figured you had some help. I didn't know that someone else was actually making the memes for you. Who actually presses a button to send the tweets? Are they all you?
I would say most of them.
Do you actually ever tweet under a different handle? A different name on Twitter?
Do I have multiple handles? Have I used other accounts? I've had other accounts, yes, Gerald. But
Are you using any others now? Like in the last year?
My other accounts were banned by Twitter. I had one account with 28,000
Okay, so
followers.
you have no other accounts that is not banned by Twitter right now?
No, I don't.
Okay, because there's certainly there are a small group that enjoys your tweets, by the way. You've seen them. They retweet
Excellent.
your memes all the time. Actually, you should
Brett Wilson
keep up
does
the copyright and make sure they pay you money for it, because then you could earn something out of this.
I don't put a copyright on it because I want my information to be freely used by anybody.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I'm sure
I enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you do
my
enjoy
work.
it.
I enjoy seeing my work in other people's timelines.
And so all this time you spend putting the memes together and the Photoshop, and everyone does that for free. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's nice.
I've never got a check from Exxon. I never got a check from Shell. I never got a check from Schlumberger, Syncrude. I don't get checks from them. This is just
and the photoshopping and the memes production. Millamina, is that her name? I forgot what you said her name was before. In any case, so she does all this for free to help you out as well.
No, Dawn does. She may have another account that she uses, but this is my only account.
No, I'm talking about when Philomena, you're the person who does the memes design for you.
She doesn't do the memes.
Oh, or the photoshopping?
That's Dawn.
Who's Dawn?
Dawn TJ90. Gerald, hello,
Yeah,
wake up.
But isn't that
oh
that
my
you?
goodness.
No. Well, who's
Tom,
Dawn?
have I sent you a picture of me and Dawn together?
In the article, in the interview with Tom, you showed him that you were Dawn TJ90.
I think you have.
Yeah.
Tom, during the interview that you did with Dale, did he not state that and you told me as well, that he is Dawn TJ90?
That's correct. But Dawn,
That's correct.
The Dawn part is the person that was in that picture with me.
I have no idea what you're
friends.
talking. Okay,
We're
now I'm more
great friends.
confused than normal by what you're saying, but that's okay. We don't have to get hung up on Dawn.
Dawn TJ90 is a collaborative effort.
I understand.
And that's what I explained that in the interview.
But it is your Twitter handle that you use. Is that correct? I
use that one now solely, exclusively.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's the only thing I was trying to clarify.
But she's still doing some infographics. I've got some I'm going to put up this afternoon. Yeah, it's a collaborative effort. She's stepped back from doing it as much as she used to. But no, we have a lot of fun. Absolutely. We've never laughed so hard in our lives at doing what we do. And it's humorous. You see pictures of people making fun of Donald Trump or Barack Obama. We're doing the same thing. It's humorism.
It's only fun when other people laugh. And it's not fun when you're literally trying to hurt people. You're not trying to you're not trying to laugh at people. You are trying to hurt them. Now, you may find that funny that you're hurting people. Okay, but most people don't find it funny. And that's why it's cruel. And so you can laugh to your heart. You and your little buddies can laugh to your heart's extent. You and your little buddies can laugh to your heart's extent by your silly, dishonest memes. But I can tell you, when you hurt people and you are deliberately trying to intimidate them, when you're deliberately trying to harass them, nobody finds that funny except for you and your little group. So if you think that's funny, there's something really wrong. Because harassment is never funny.
Something's really wrong with somebody that
intimidation is never funny. Trying to hurt somebody by trying to discredit them with your memes is never funny. So please don't say it's amusing. It is not. It's hurtful.
Absolutely is amusing. Just like what you said, Gerald. Climate deniers deserve a special place in hell. I hope so. You said that was fun. This is my fun.
That was my gist, and you're the ones that repeated that 100 or 200 times. And I do.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I do make general comments about climate denialism, I do not harass one person and try to intimidate day in, day out with one after another. This just goes on.
You have
for 365 days of the year. You harass. There's three or four climate scientists. There's three or four climate scientists, and there's three or four activists that literally on a daily basis that you're hounding. This is stalking at the worst it can be. It's virtual stalking, and you do it.
Do you remember when you posted on your timeline to report Dawn?
Yeah,
do you remember that?
And I've reported you many times.
I know. I think it's hilarious.
Because harassment is supposed to be it's supposed to be abuse. And Twitter is supposed to not allow abuse. But of course, Twitter is very direct. How many times has your account been even briefly suspended?
Probably less than yours.
That's impossible because my account has never been suspended.
How many times have you posted that you're in Twitter jail?
Yeah,
hundreds of times.
I have is it happens a lot, and that's because
I've never been in Twitter jail.
I'll explain that for you. What it is that they restrict some of your following and ability to do retweets for a while, and that's because I kept on breaking their follow rules. Now, going back to the original question on you, so my account was never suspended. How many times has your Twitter account been suspended? And by that means that you could not use your Twitter account for a period of time for whatever reason.
I do. That happens when I appeal a decision to delete.
I know. That's because you've been charged with something that breaks Twitter's rules.
I know.
How many times has that happened?
How many times have I appealed a tweet?
How many times?
Oh, probably 20 times.
Okay, so 20 times. Twitter thought your tweet broke its rules enough, probably for abusive behavior from the ones I've seen, and they've done that 20 times. You don't think that's excessive?
I appealed. I put 2 posts.
You can appeal to your.
I put 2
and I know
posts
I've seen you make
Greta.
excuses before. You've done
I
it
put
20
2 posts
times.
of Greta, the exact same one. They both. I was supposed to take them down. I appealed them. They were the exact same picture. I appealed them. I won on one, lost on the other. Try to make that make sense.
Okay, so if Twitter has actually found you 20 times that they felt that you broke their rules, what was wrong with me reporting that you broke the rules? And I've explained how misleading
that's how it comes about, Gerald.
Pardon me?
That's how it comes about. Report Dawn. That's how it comes about. There's mass reporting. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing to be ashamed of.
You've done nothing wrong?
No. Oh, no, once I did. Sorry. I did misassign Michael Mann to something that Mike Holm wrote.
Every single tweet you issue is abusive behavior. We are out to intimidate, where you're out to harass, where you're out to humiliate people. And so I just wish I could report you more. I wish Twitter took its rules more serious. But if you think you do nothing wrong, well, you and I live in a different world. I do not sit there, even though I disagree with you many times, sending out 20 tweets a day saying, well, Don said this, and isn't he a bad person? And Don said this, and Don said that. But that's what you do.
Go through my timeline. Do it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm proud of the effort that we do.
I've seen more than enough of your tweets to know exactly what you do. It's very apparent what you do day in, day out. And I understand you're proud of what you do and you think you've done nothing wrong.
I'm sorry.
Well, I totally agree with that. And so you and I, maybe, and your followers think you're right. Hopefully mine think I'm right. Okay. But all I know is that in my opinion, what you're doing is horrendous.
I think what you're doing is horrendous. You're
And I take that as
criticizing
a
the
compliment.
entire
When
world.
someone like you tells me I'm doing
You're
something
criticizing
horrendous,
the entire world, but you're not criticizing China. You're not criticizing India.
oh, another deflection by a typical climate denier that I hear 20
Gerald,
times a day.
China's using more than half the coal in the world.
I don't live in China. Okay, I live in Canada.
Look after your own house first.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to look after your own house first,
Okay,
Gerald?
I'm not going
before
to
you come
defend
after me
myself
for
to
mine?
you, Don, ever. Okay, because
Dale.
you're the last person in the world that I would ever do that to.
But you do that to the entire world. You criticize the entire world, but you don't walk the talk. You never have, Gerald. You still eat meat according to your timeline. You know that there's an agreement that was signed by the Ontario Minister of Health. Where did I have it? He signed an agreement in 2015 with several different provinces and states and countries in North and South America. They're going to limit each person's carbon use per year to 2 tons. The average Canadian uses 14. Are you going to cut down 700% from it? They're going to be making, that's why, there's already a credit card out in conjunction with the UNFCCC in Sweden. It's a carbon credit card. It's a black card. They track your carbon by purchases. And when you hit the limit, they shut off that limit. You can't buy anymore because you've hit your preset limit. That's coming. Ontario is already on board with it. And how are you going to cut it down? That's why people are going to be eating insects because they can't buy meat because their carbon is used up. They can't buy anymore. They can't buy gas. You got to take your family to the
take
hospital.
A rest and lay down for a while because you're just rambling from one topic to the next. I have no idea what you're babbling about.
I'm trying to tell you.
And frankly,
the 15-minute time limit, the 15-minute cities is coming. Ottawa's putting that plan in place. England's doing that. Edmonton's doing it.
Okay, Dale,
it's probably going to be everywhere.
This. Do you think the world should be doing anything to stop the climate crisis?
You can't. Policies will not change the climate crisis. Sorry, Gerald.
Well, I didn't say that. I said, what should be done to stop the climate crisis? Do you believe anything should be done to stop the climate crisis? Anything?
There's no climate crisis. The temperature where I live varies 75 degrees every 6 months.
And we can settle this once and for all. I understand that you believe there is no climate crisis.
Because I've heard climate crisis for 70 years.
Contact NASA, contact NOAA, contact the IPCC, contact the National Academy of Sciences. Go on and let them know that there's no climate crisis, and you put your package together and tell me how that works out for you.
I'm with Svante Arrhenius. I'm with Svante Arrhenius.
I seen your meme how you misquote him too, but
it's not misquoting him.
Are you going to give the typical climate denier quote from Arrhenius where she states that global warming is essentially...
I do not misgender Svante Arrhenius. Gerald, you got to do better than that. It's not a she.
What do they do?
He's a scientist. Svante Arrhenius.
Sorry?
Svante Thunberg, sorry. No, Arrhenius. Svante Arrhenius. Yeah.
Okay, Svante Arrhenius in his paper did state that a warming world would be good for the world. And he was wrong.
I'll give you the quote.
Because I know the quote.
By influence of increasing percentage of carbonic acid in the atmosphere, we may hope to enjoy ages with more equitable and better climates.
That Dale,
especially
the point is he did not know the
regions.
implication of what it would do to the climate. He
understands.
He did not understand.
The Earth is usually in an ice-free state.
That was not understood until much later, and so he was wrong about that. And if
he wasn't wrong, Calendar did the same thing.
And Callender did the same thing. And Callender was publishing in the late 30s and the 40s. In the 80 years that have gone on since, science has progressed. You can live in the Stone Age if you want, when the science was first came out, but science corrects its mistakes. And those statements by both those two have now been corrected. So live in the science of the 2020s,
well, they haven't been
in the
corrected.
1920s, okay?
Well, it's worse than that, Gerald. The 2-ton limit that's already been signed by the environment minister in Ottawa or in Ontario. Do you know the last time that the Canadian per capita emissions were 2 tons? 1986, Gerald. That's the lifestyle you want us to go back to.
That Ford government is so anti-climate change, it's unbelievable. So if they actually try to do something positive about climate change, I think that's fantastic. But I have no idea what you're talking about, and I don't care. Okay, what I do care about...
It's a policy that's just waiting for the bill to enforce it.
Okay, so let's go back. So you think, what is the point of even talking about this? You believe that you know better than every climate scientist in the world because you believe that global warming, that the climate crisis doesn't exist.
That's a null hypothesis.
I'll repeat this for you because I understand you have no scientific training, so you don't understand this.
Wait,
scientific theory is accepted until new evidence suggests otherwise.
No, Gerald. No, Gerald. Okay. Just like I told you with polywater. It was a money grab. People put flowery words into incredibly complex paragraphs and they got them published. And it was
so lost.
It was all a scam. It was a scam.
I love these statements by climate deniers because it just proves that climate denialism is a lost cause, such a lost cause. Polywater was shown to be wrong by science.
One scientist.
It was proven wrong by science.
Correct it, Gerald.
Nope. Okay, who has disproven the science of climate change? Who?
It's all natural, Gerald.
Who has disproved the science of climate change?
It's all natural. Climate changes. That's what it does.
Says you.
No, James Hansen said it.
No, Jim Hansen did not say it. Now you're misquoting and making stuff up again. You're saying that Jim Hansen did not believe in global warming was caused by man?
I never said that. See, you're taking that out of context.
You just said it was natural.
It is.
Then you're saying
climate is what James Hansen said. Climate is always changing. Climate would fluctuate with any change of climate forcings. The chaotic aspect of climate is an innate characteristic of the coupled fundamental equations describing climate system dynamics. He's also said, despite the similarity of CO2 and temperature curves, it should not be assumed that CO2 caused climate change. That's where I am today.
Scientists do not assume anything. What they do is they go out and prove it, and that's what Dr. Hansen did.
Gerald, you said science doesn't prove anything.
That Dr. Hansen said it was natural is a lie, or you are terribly confused. Jim Hansen is one of them. I don't care what you quoted. It just shows all the other garbage that you quote in your info trash.
You're good, Gerald.
Yeah, you can laugh all you want. This is insulting. You're saying that Jim Hansen, one of the leading climate scientists in the world, one of the pioneers, does not believe that modern climate change is not caused by us.
He believed the deadline was 2013. Gerald, it's gone.
Now you're blabbering off from something else. You just said that Dr. Hansen believed it was natural.
Yeah.
He didn't.
He did.
Okay,
I just quoted it.
I'm talking to a wall. Your quote does not say the word natural once.
Climate is always changing. That's natural. By definition.
Now you're putting words in his mouth. Says the great person that never takes and it just gives direct quotes. So you're just contradicting yourself, Dale. It just shows that, and it happens over and over again.
If climate is always changing, what's
Dale,
doing it?
I get frustrated because I'm not trying to dislike people like you. You know, I bet you have lots of friends and people like you. And there's probably lots of good things you've done in your life. But being a climate denier is not one of them. I don't know
Well,
if
Gerald,
you
I
have,
don't deny the climate.
I don't know if you
I never have.
if you have kids or not. But if you had kids and you're a climate denier, there's something really wrong.
I'm with James Hansen on his statements in 1980.
No,
Nothing's
you're
changed
in your
except the
you're in
politics.
his misquotes that you've taken out of context with your infamous quote mining that even you don't even know what you're stating anymore.
Okay, well, climate is always changing. Is that right or
Yes.
wrong?
That's right.
How is that? I thought that was out of context.
Oh, Gail, please stop
His
deflecting.
next one. Climate would fluctuate without any change in climate forcings. Is
You
that
have
right
to read
or
the
wrong?
whole paper. And why does, okay, let's make this easy for you. Climate has been changing since the world's been created over millions of
Yep.
years. And before
Despite
we were
virgins
around,
being thrown in
I can let
volcanoes.
you know, I'll give you into a secret. Even I will admit that, back millions of years ago, climate change was not caused by us. I will actually admit that millions of years ago, climate change was not caused by us. But what science has shown beyond a doubt, that modern climate change, let's say the last 150 years or so, is not part of a natural cycle. In fact, it's largely caused by us, and in some respects is more than 100% caused by us, because the sun has caused.
If it's warming, I'll take credit for 200%. But it's not warming.
I don't care what you have to say, Dale, that it's not warming. You admit you have no credibility. Why should I care that you think it's not warming? Because you can quote some lines out of context that this is somehow demeaning science?
All I do is quote the global average temperature put out by the World Health Organization, NOAA, NASA, whatever.
And no climate scientist uses that to determine global warming. Have you ever seen?
I just told you they did.
No, you don't care what you told me, Dale. How many graphs have you seen of a plot of global temperature of the Earth over the last 150 years? Zippo. What you see is plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees Celsius over the last 150 years. It doesn't matter what graph you look at, NOAA, NASA, it doesn't matter where it comes from. They look at temperature variance. They do not look at global temperature.
That's how they get the variance, Gerald.
They do
That's
not.
how they get the variance.
They do not. They get it from the variance of the individual stations, because the individual stations can change for different reasons. There is clear articles in NASA that show why they do not use global temperature, and that those temperature graphs have nothing to do with this temperature of the world that you mysteriously have dreamt up that scientists use. It is not true. It's not a fact.
Okay, so guys, we're at about the 90-minute mark. I think we need to wrap up pretty soon, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're both going around in circles here. Dale's made his point the best he can. I've made my point the best I can. And we didn't swear at each other once, so at least that was an achievement.
Okay. So do either one of you have just any final point that you didn't make yet that you'd like to make before we wrap up? You have anything to say now? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dale.
I'm going to mock people that use Chicken Little in their timeline. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. I'm going to mock them forever.
Okay, and I just like to sum up by really summarizing what I warned at the beginning of this video, that we've gone into the darkest layers of the denialism, the home of the stalker trolls, who relentlessly humiliate and harass leading climate scientists and climate activists, often using quote miming and memes. This is a vile campaign of intimidation. I've tried to make my point here today. Dale's tried his. And our viewers are going to decide who is right.
And you notice I'm the only one that referred to science.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, both of you. And we'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tom.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.